Hello, everybody, and welcome to the premiere episode of Comprehend This. We're kicking things off with a question. How do we survive teaching languages before we knew what comprehensible input was? Short answer, we didn't. We fumbled, lectured, drilled, and prayed our students would magically absorb Spanish, French, German, Mandarin, whichever language in their sleep. Spoiler, they didn't. I'm joined by the hilarious and wise Jodi Dinsmore and Paulino Brener as we swap war stories from our before CI days, the disasters, the accidental breakthroughs, and the survival tricks that kept us going when we had no idea what we were doing. So grab your favorite beverage, make it strong, settle in, and get ready to laugh, cringe, and feel a whole lot better about your own CI journey. If you've ever thought it is just me, it's not. Welcome to the club.
Welcome to Comprehend This, real talk for real language teachers. No drills, no dry theory, just honest stories, practical ideas, and a reminder you're not alone in the CI trenches. Let's dive in.
And welcome, Jodi and Paulino. How are we doing this morning?
Okay. Besides having to run from my home because of the smoke alarm, not smoke, but the battery. And I'm very tall. I always say I'm the tallest. I always say Spanish teacher. I'm gonna say world language teacher. But because I'm 6'6", so I still need to find someone taller than me. But my unit is much taller, so I couldn't reach it. So here I am in a different space. So hopefully it will work. We might have some, I don't know, people behind us. I don't know. But
Okay.
I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you. And Jodi's coming to us from Mexico. How are we doing this morning, Jodi?
Fine. It's gray, probably going to be a rainy day here today. I'm on the outskirts of Morelia, Michoacan, in the Central Highlands. And here on very little sleep, my husband had a fun concert last night, and we didn't get home till after 2. And
Oh my
so
gosh.
I have a strong mug of coffee here.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, big fun.
So, yes, welcome to our premiere episode. And today's topic is how you fell into CI and survived. So, let's start with you, Paulino. What did your teaching look like before you found comprehensible input?
Well, I've heard many teachers who, started their teaching career with a very traditional methodology, legacy, grammar based. Um, and in a way, that was my start when I was starting to be an English teacher in Argentina. And even though I was learning in my teaching preparation course all about being communicative and context. And I heard of Krashen even then, even though I didn't pay that much attention because there were so many other names that I needed to remember. Um, we we were having a different idea of what communication was. So we were doing structured dialogues. So this is the dialogue for the restaurant. This is the dialogue for the bank, like a very functional approach to it, and more grammar lesson, more explicit grammar lessons. But that all seemed pretty regular to me. I wouldn't say it is quite the way that I learned to that I was learning or that I learned English, except for college. Right, in college you're preparing to be a teacher. You need to know all the grammar rules. But as a kid, because I started when I was 10, it was, I remember all be pretty fluent, and yes, there was some flashcards and things like that. But when I had to do my practicum for being an English teacher, there was an expectation that there was going to be a presentation, a practice, and a production, a PPP type of approach, even though the practice was this dialogue. So that was my first encounter of a traditional method. But then, John, I came to I came to United States. Yeah, this is a show with sound effects and everything. I came to United States to teach Spanish at Concordia Language Villages. Have you two ever heard of Concordia Language Villages?
I have
Yes.
not. No.
So Concordia Language Villages is the premier world language program in Minnesota, and it's immersion camps. And I don't know how many languages they have right now because after COVID, everything changed. But at some point, they have about 14 different languages. So you could go to these summer camps and be immersed in the language for 1 week, 2 weeks, usually children. So I was teaching, I came to teach there, and that's without without knowing the name CI. Uh, that's without knowing the lingo that I know now. I was in a context where there was real communication and not constructed real communication. We really were at a table and we really need to talk about pass me the salt. It was not an exercise. It was like, really, pass me the salt, and a lot of content-based instruction because you have all these activities in the language. And, uh, you know, using English there was discouraged. Although now it changed a little more. I mean, now knowing more about translanguage and stuff like that, but it was use all the resources you have at hand to make it comprehensible. Now the beauty of that setting was that you have these real needs. When you have to do an activity and we are gonna be at a soccer match. We were at a soccer match and learning how to communicate with each other. So there were all these real situations, and that's when I started to think, okay, how does it translate into the classroom? And we can talk about that a little more later.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Jodi, what about your experience?
I, unlike Paulina, never took education courses. I studied Spanish, but moved from college into international business and very quickly became disillusioned with it. And after one particularly trying day at work, I got home to my little apartment in Manhattan and called my high school Spanish teacher and said, I can't do this. How do I become a teacher? And so he steered me towards a couple of independent school placement agencies, and I went to their job fairs. And my second interview resulted in a great job where I was for 7 years, with very open teachers. And uh, but it was traditional teaching in a boarding school, right? And non-CI really. Um, but I was teaching especially the upper levels, and so we were doing a lot with reading and authentic resources. So I guess in my own way, we were doing that. And a couple of the students ended up being Spanish teachers, and one owns a chain of Mexican burrito joints in Australia and New Zealand and the Philippines. And he credits being in my class for a couple of years with him taking a year abroad in Chile in university. And so I guess I did something right. Um, but it was a lot in like Spanish 3 honors. It was a lot of drills, a lot of grammar, 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 grammar. And it was, yeah, I mean, it's what I grew up with. It was stressful, but I didn't use that old AMSCO workbook that I had used in ninth, 10th, and 11th grade, but I might as well have, you know. And yeah, lots of drills. So I was happy to, when I went back to the States to work 9 years ago, um, Actual was in Boston that year, just an hour and a half away. And I was pleased to discover that the whole department had been um, given entry and hotel and whatnot. And so we took a van and went over to Boston, and my eyes opened because so much had changed in the 21 years since I had left the States. And I had no idea. I'd never heard of comprehensible input. I remember vaguely having a session at the first school with Blaine Ray, um, but that was eons before, and it really felt like that was Spanish one, and I wasn't teaching Spanish one, so it kind of didn't feel like it related to me. But yeah, so that was the beginning. Was that actual conference?
Well, my experience was very, very different. I started teaching school late. I was in my 30s. Well, actually, I didn't start teaching school right away. I was hired on what's called an emergency permit, which means if you have a bachelor's and you can breathe, you can teach. So I was hired 2 months into the school year, right after 9/11, to teach at a very prestigious LA high school, meaning 96% of the kids either went to UCLA or USC. It was highly Asian, about 80% Asian kids. A lot of them were immigrants. Um, and they were like, it was high demand. When I had back to school night, all the parents, grandparents, everybody showed up because they want to know who this teacher was and who was replacing the sub that had been there for the first 2 months of school. So it's like October, middle of October is when I started. I had no idea how to teach at all. And so I just parroted what I took in high school, because I took Spanish, French, and German in high school. And so I just did what that was. And the first couple days they said, you can observe. Oh, I was only teaching 2 periods, fifth and sixth period after lunch. So it was only part time, because it was just the overflow classes. So I would observe in the morning for the first day. And then the second day, they said, okay, you can observe for about 4 days, and on Friday, you'll start. Well, I came lunch on Tuesday, and they said, you're on. I mean, what do you mean I'm on? They go, we didn't get a sub today. Here's the textbook. Go for it. And I had like a 10-minute notice, and I had no idea. And I just opened the first page. It was level two. And I had not even been taking Spanish classes for many years, because my major is German, not Spanish. So I hadn't been even using my Spanish in a long time. So it was really a strange thing. And I had a student in that class. His name was Bevan. Um, and his nickname was White Bread because he was as white as ghost. And he said to me that day, he goes, Profe goes, you looked scared like a rabbit that day. And I was scared like a rabbit that day. I had no idea what I was doing. Um, and then I went to I was just teaching like I was taught to teach. Well, I'm not taught, like I was taught. I taught that way, and I was so bored, and my students were so bored, and I had to fight to keep myself awake. And I was like, I can't do 30 years of this. There is no way that I'm going to be able to keep this up for 30 years. Um, and then I started teaching classes, and in my school we didn't have a practice class for languages. So we didn't have that how to teach languages class. If you didn't teach math, science, English, or history, you were all lumped together as teachers. So I was in with art teachers and business teachers and PE teachers, and that's how I was taught to teach. So I got nothing about language whatsoever in that class. But my school put me in something called LA Stars, which is kind of like a training for teachers, and we had it once a month. And I got exposed to, I didn't even know what it was at the time. It was just storytelling, TPRS at the time. And it was in one of the indigenous languages. And I remember 2 out of the 3 words we were taught, and that was way back in 2001. So it was effective. So that's kind of how my beginning started. But I was, for the whole first semester of that year of 2001 2002 school year, I was failing. I was miserable. My students were miserable. None of us were awake. It was pulling teeth that whole way. It was just very, very stressful. And as I said, if something didn't change, I would not be here today. So that was
Scott,
kind of,
And
oh, go
you
ahead.
just jogged a memory for me that my first day of class at that first boarding school, we had normal length classes, and then there was an hour, 50-minute class for each class one time a week. And my first class that I walked into was one of those very long classes, Spanish 2. I had written out, I don't remember how many pages on a legal tablet, front and back of the pages. And I started going through it, introducing myself and who were they, and kind of playing a little name game and this and that. And within about 11 minutes, I think, I was done with all the pages and just looking at them like, now what? And I don't even remember what I did, but I just remember thinking, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I should go back to a serving tables.
And what were you going to say, Paulino?
No, that it's interesting how people come from different backgrounds, and um, one thing that we as educators have, maybe as an asset, or most educator, is the commitment to the student and the persistence and that desire of professional development, right? Because in some way or another, could be you were in a teaching lesson or in these conversation groups, the desire to do better, to change, led us to find alternatives. While in other, I'm not saying there's no professional development in other subjects, but it's like, okay, you learned all the math you need to teach, and
Yeah.
you're done with the math. I mean, I'm not saying there's no professional development there, but sometimes when I talk to other uh, subjects that are different than teaching a world language, it's like, yeah, I'm done. I'm learning this new, I don't know, maybe a new app or new way to test or something like that. Um, but but I think that's one of our characteristics, and I dare to say a little more of world language teachers, that we are opening all those windows into another culture that also led us um, to find new ways to connect to one another. And I think that ties in with the ways that we teach, looking at that connection with our students, with true, real communication in the context of our classrooms.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that kind of leads us into our next little topic here, that what was our aha moment or our oh no moment that kind of made us switch in to that mode of comprehensible input or doing something different than traditional. I'm not going to tell my story just yet, but in my school, they were very traditional teachers. So it was a large school. We had 4,000 students in the school. We had a Japanese teacher, I believe it was two Mandarin teachers, a French teacher, and 6 or 7 Spanish teachers. So we were a large group, and everybody was doing teaching traditionally. The AP test back then was very grammar focused, so that's what they were honing in on, because they kept saying we're teaching to the AP exam for all of our students. That was our goal. So they were very, very grammar oriented. So when I made my switch, I was going upstream compared to everybody else. So, what was that impetus to make you switch from what you're doing and doing a non traditional approach? And this time we'll go ahead and start with Jodi.
Again, I'm going to go back to that Boston Actful in 2016. I was the department chair at this school that I had just gone to, and one of the other Spanish teachers had done some PD um, in CI. So he was trying to talk to me about it, but I didn't really get what he was about. He couldn't express it and explain it very well. But all of us went to an organic world language workshop at ACTFL. And it was really mind blowing to see how effective it could be in a very short time, like a 30-minute workshop or 20-minute workshop. And so later that same year, I had an OWL, Organic World Language, one of their people come to the school and do a workshop for us and some outside people who came as well. And I never 100% took in the OWL method, but and what really struck me with it was the instant community that you built. And so that has really been my focus ever since, is to strive for community with all of my students. And so that was huge and remains so.
Awesome. And what about you, Paulino?
Well, like I mentioned before, this idea of looking for professional development, it's part of our nature in general. I'm very passionate about professional development. So even though I was still working on my license, I was going to conferences and presenting the little I know. And at one of the regional conferences, I think it was the Minnesota uh, State Conference, most likely. That's where I live, Minnesota. Hello, Minnesota. You betcha. How you doing? Anyway, I saw Jan Kitok or Janice Kitok. She's very well known in Minnesota and at the national level for teaching with CI and integrating culture, and that was my first introduction to. Even though I have those some of these elements of communication and making things comprehensible from my immersion experience, that was my first time at a session she did at one of these conferences to see how to structure it in a way that it was clear, sustainable, something that I could replicate, not just copy what she did, but just take the skills that she was applying and then using my own personality and my own ideas, um, and integrating stories. So that was my first introduction. I absorbed everything, and then I did a lot of research, and trying to find other people. But that was my aha moment when I saw it's like I've done some of the things that I'm observing in this demo. It's just that it's not always in a consistent way that I can, do spiral my vocabulary and structures, or use comprehension checks consistently and things like that. So that those ideas that have been percolating by my experience in immersion, now it all came to place by having a structure or a set of skills behind it that make me stronger and more prepared to bring it to my students.
And for me, it was very, as I said, I sucked as a teacher that first semester. It was really, really bad. In fact, my principal told me after the fact that I was not going to be eligible for rehire at that first semester because it was so bad. And I told you I was at this thing, LA Stars, and Louis, I forgot his last name. I can't remember. Armstrong comes up, but I don't think that's what it was. Louis and his sister, um, were at this LA Stars conference, and Louis was I was in phase one, so Louis was my thing, and we did the he did the TPRS with a story, and I remember the two words like kutsum and kachai. Kachai was hit, and kutsum was kiss. I remember those two words. The third word, I don't remember what the third word was, but he told a story about Godzilla and this girl and going back and forth. And I was like, I understood what was going on. And there was no grammar, there was no vocabulary, there was nothing that I had to, memorize. And I was just dumbfounded. And then his sister, and they were from the high desert in the LA. Oh, it's not really LA. It's about an hour and a half. It's on its way to Vegas, out there. But they're in the high, what's called the high desert out there. And she brought in her kids. Remember, this was November, so they had been in school what, 2 months on average. And they were reading the book Pobreana. Back then, we didn't have very many books. They were all Blaine Ray books, and Pobreana was the book that everybody read in level one. And she had an inner circle, outer circle activity that she was doing. And there's a scene in Pobreana, if you don't know, at least the Spanish version. Anna gets an exchange student program, and the dad thinks he's got to pay for it, and she says, "Oh no, it's free," and they're arguing back and forth, and so these kids did an inner circle, outer circle. One played Anna, the other played the father, and they were just talking with each other and arguing back and forth. And I was like, this was level one in November, and I was just so impressed. So then I started grabbing everything I could find about TPRS, because that was, we didn't call it CI back then. It was the only thing that was CI was TPRS back then, because this was 2001. I joined what was called the More TPRS list on Yahoo groups way back when. That was my lifeline. Um, and then I found Blaine Ray's books, and I bought all of those books. And then I studied over break. I had no training whatsoever, none. I studied all those books. There was no YouTube back then. YouTube didn't come out till 2005, so I couldn't watch anybody else. Nobody around me was doing it. So, come second semester, I just winged it. I scripted everything out. I did my stories. Um, and we were using a book, a very old book called Yaveras at the time. And we were, second semester was the beginning of the vacation chapter. So then I was like, well, Blaine Ray's books didn't follow a thematic type of a thing. So I just went and looking for all the stories that had anything with vacation in it and swapped out the dumb words I had to teach. Because I remember I had to teach seaweed and I had to teach seagull. I'm like, yes, these are high frequency. My kids are going to be using this a lot. And it was so funny. My Bevan, remember I told you, I'm like, okay, I'm trying to figure out gestures because I was not good with coming up with those yet. So we did gaviota, we did the arms flying for seagull. And then I'm like, I don't know what we can do for seaweed. And then Bevan raises his hand. And again, first year teacher, didn't know what to expect. And here's what Bevan did. And for those of you who are listening on the podcast, I'll have to describe it because you won't be able to see what I'm doing. But Bevan stands up and he goes profane. He puts his fingers to his lips like he's smoking a joint and goes, C, points to his eyes, C, and then he takes his fingers and makes a little joint thing and goes, weed. And I'm like, oh my gosh, first year teacher problems. And I'm like, nope, that we're not doing that one. And then someone else came with waving their arms in the air, kind of like one of those used car salesman kind of things. And that's what we ended up using. And my principal came in to observe, and he's like, oh my gosh, that is a night and day change from what you did first semester to what you did second semester. And I'm like, it ain't me, it's the method, because I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, I was scripted. I had the thing written out and I was following it. I was just reading it. There was no real interaction. It was like just answer yes, no questions, that kind of thing. And that's when he told me, he goes, you were not eligible for rehire after first semester, but second semester you made such a drastic change over such a short time. And remember, I hadn't even started teaching school yet. I didn't start teaching school until my second year of teaching. So this is all that I got. And I took my first TPRS class with Susan Gross. She was my first teacher. I did that in that summer. And we bonded together, our whole group did, because on the way, it was in Orange County, and I lived in the valley, so that was about an hour or so drive. We bonded because on the way there, that was when the second space shuttle blew up. And it blew up over entry when it came in, and you could see the pieces over California. They were coming through. And so that was our talk for the first few minutes of class because we were like all dumbfounded by that horrible event. But I just remember that right off the bat. That was that summer. And that was my first TPRS class that I had with Susie Gross. She taught French. I had some French background, but it was way back from 1992, so over a decade ago. But she brought it all back. So that was kind of my aha moment. When I was in that LA Stars, and I knew that I had to make this change. I wanted my kids to be able to do the things that these kids were being able to do, and my kids just could not because of where they were at all. In fact, I had a girl who was a senior, and she gave me her senior picture, and on the back she wrote, "Thank you for passing me," because She could not speak or write any Spanish whatsoever, and this is level 2, but she did her homework and she did her projects and she made them look pretty, so she got good grades on her projects and did all of her homework, so she maintained a C in the class, when really, in fact, she probably shouldn't have passed because she couldn't do any Spanish whatsoever, and she knew it. That's why she wrote "thank you for passing me" on the back of her senior photo. So that was my beginning experience. So very, very different. We all have different experiences, which is what's great, because a lot of the teachers out there, they're all coming from different experiences as well, and don't and think that they can't be a Blaine, or they can't be a Susie, or they can't be a Karen Rowan. That they've got all these ideas in their head, and we're all different. We all come from different backgrounds, and we bring what we know to the method and add to it and take away some things from it, and to make it our own so that works well for our students. So, our next question up. Um, what was your first CI win? And your first face palm, when your big fail that you had? Who wants to go first? I'll let you guys choose.
I'll go with the win.
Okay, Paulino, go ahead.
So, well, because I didn't have my state license yet, I was working with a program that was before and after school Spanish for public primary schools that did not offer Spanish, that usually they don't in the United States. And hello to our international viewers and listeners. Uh, um, so the program was pretty, pretty structured. They give you this booklet and you follow. You introduce the vocabulary with flashcards. You play this game. You teach this song, and then you do this craft. It was kind of like a enhanced babysitting moment in a way. I mean, every teacher brought the best of them and connection with students. I mean, it was not too bad. But having have that experience from Immersion, and then having seen Jan Kitok, and also I wanted kind of to mention I come from a background of theater and storytelling naturally. So to me, bringing those skills was not a stretch. Again, the key was being able to structure it and being purposeful about them. So within that structure that I was given for this before and after school program, I thought this is boring. I mean, we boring for me. The kids were having a blast. We were running around singing. That was fine. But I wanted more, because at the end of the day, it was like, yeah, if I show you the flashcard of a red balloon, you would say rojo. And I wanted more than that. So I started to just ask permission, because this was a private company. Like, is it okay if I integrate all these ideas into a mini story and I do a story with the students? So I started doing more integrated with stories and having a lot of success with it. And the win moment was, so this being a private company that parents pay extra, and basically you are always selling, always selling. At the dismissal, usually in the afternoon, that parents come and pick up the children. We usually would say adios, goodbye, hasta luego, just a greeting. Instead, I would ask questions about the lesson, and I would ask yes, no, either or questions, right? Just the basic circling question that make the students sound, that they were producing, because they have to understand. So instead of saying adios, hasta pronto, that the parents heard over and over and over, for each student, and parents in the line were listening, I would say, oh, ¿te gustó el perro azul o te gustó el perro rojo? Did you like the blue dog or did you like the red dog? So I'm having this mini conversation, kind of like an exit ticket with each student. And in a way, I was kind of, showing off what they could do for the parents, because you're always selling. And that was the best selling point. The parents were so proud that they were not just saying adios, adios, which is fine. It's a greeting, it's goodbye, but they would have a little bit of a peek of what their students could do. They had this mini communication moment, and because I asked different questions to each student, those who were in line waiting, they could see that it was not just the same question to every student. I would ask different questions to other students. So that became kind of a selling point. Later, I worked with some of the other teachers and trying to incorporate more some of those stories, because not only that became engaging, uh, there was more production from students, not forced output, but we noticed that students were more engaged into the content that with the stories, and win-win for the company. It became more like a selling point that the students were immersed in stories that were very compelling to them, and the parents could see there was not just learning vocabulary from a list, but there was a context, and yes, love it. And and they could see also the function of it, like that meaning, the real communication, which in the end what's the parents wanted. The parents were not interested. I mean, to be realistic, yeah, parents would be happy if they could see their young kids from first and second grade just sing a song of the ABC or count 1 to 10. They were happy for anything, because at the time there was nothing. But they were even more impressed when it was more closer to what they would see as a real conversation, a question and answer that was different. So that was a nice win.
Awesome. That was great. What about you, Jodi?
Okay, when I first went back to the States in 2016, I thought I was going to be hired at a particular boarding and day school in Pennsylvania. Um, and at the very last minute, I got the letter saying, no, we had to go with a male teacher who can coach boys soccer and live in a boys' dorm. And so sorry. And I ended up in Massachusetts, and it was all fine. But a year and a half later, I got a call from the Pennsylvania school saying, we made a mistake. We'd like you to come. And so I decided to move because it was closer to my mother and sisters. And so I went to Pennsylvania. And eventually, the assistant head of school kept saying that he was going to come and observe a class. And he would say it and he would say it, and I'd get all prepared, and, and then he would never show up. And so at one point, in the AP class, we had watched the film Coco. It was, I guess, shortly after it came out. And that particular day, I set up um, tables around the back of the room. I wasn't using desks. And I did I think it's comprehensible classroom Coco stations. And it was, like I said, with AP kids, and they maintained Spanish the entire time and completely dove into the tasks and did a phenomenal job. And the assistant head was just sitting there seemingly on his phone the whole time. But at the end of the class, he came up to me and said, we should have hired you 2 years ago. And that made me feel really good. And another instance that happened at that school, I had a Spanish 1 class that was mostly local day students. And then a couple of international students. There was a girl from Ukraine and a boy from Swaziland, and I don't remember who all else was in the class, but partway through the year, I started getting lacrosse boys who were late admits, but to be there for lacrosse season. And they had a completely different look on the school. They really didn't fit in with the school culture, and they formed this very noisy clique in the classroom. And up till then, the class had been really very focused and doing well, and suddenly I was losing control of the whole thing, and I thought, okay, we're going to do a class novel and see how this goes. And so I chose the little book, La Perezosa Impaciente. I think it might be by Myra Kenyon. I'm not sure. Um,
Yes, it is.
and
Yeah.
yeah, okay. And I assigned each of the lacrosse boys to be the main characters. And they took on this, and then the other kids wanted to be rotating narrators. And the lacrosse boys, every class they got sweaty. One, there's a motorcycle. One of them was the motorcycle. The other was, I think there's a it's been a few years since I've used it, a monkey, the sloth, whatever. And so, they're jumping on the motorcycle, and it was crazy. And then from that moment on, those boys joined the class, and it was a there you go, Myra. Yeah. Um, it was a complete and total game changer. And I wasn't sure if those boys were going to get on board with a book, but they did. And so, yeah, my life in that class changed dramatically. It was
That's
fabulous.
awesome.
And yeah, and just took some sweat. I mean, there were splats on the floor. It was really quite dangerous, but but they all loved it. So
I'll tell you mine. It was a little bit on the scary side though, because again, this is my second year of teaching now. I'm in school. And on the more TPRS list, Blaine put out a challenge because way we taught back when I started, we did seven. I don't remember all the 7 steps, but there were 7 steps of TPRS that we were supposed to do, and you were supposed to complete that all in one class period, all 7 steps. And so it was a sprint because you barely had a few minutes to do each step. There was no circling back then. We were just supposed to repeat the story 3 times. That was the closest thing to circling that we had back then. And for those who don't know, circling is just asking scaffolded differentiated questions. Yes, no, either or, who, what, where, when questions. Well, he said, and how we started was we had to pre-teach the vocabulary. So the first couple of weeks, we had to teach 100 words of TPR before we even started into stories. 100 words. It took about 3 to 4 weeks to get that in there, and we did TPR with that. And our kids knew that those words really, really well, but they were all in isolation. They really weren't in sentences or paragraphs or anything like that. So that's how I had been doing TPRS for that first semester. And then that second year, I was going to start doing it that way too. And he said, I would like some people to experiment and just do 20 words of TPR and then start with stories right after that. I'm like, 20 words of TPR? How am I going to tell a story with only 20 words of TPR? And I don't remember what all the 20 words were, but they were like, kick was in there. I don't remember. I guess I do remember kick was in there. I had to teach that word. But there were just 20 words, and they weren't even very high frequency words. And I'm like, now I got to teach a story? So I said, Blaine, okay, I'll do it, but I'm only going to ruin one of my classes. I am not going to screw up all of my classes. So it was my fourth period. I picked my fourth period. And we had switched from Yavadas to what do they call it? They modernized it. Now I can't remember what it was called. I can't remember the name of the book now. I lost it. But Karen Rowan had written a really good supplement, a TPRS supplement for the book. So I got the stories and I could work with the book much easier. So that's what we were doing. And so I started the stories right away. I mean, 20 words, I got that done in a week. So week 2, I was going into stories, and I'm like, my kids are going to get lost. They are going to be so off. But what I found doing that was because I got away from isolated words quicker and got into actual language faster, my fourth period were leaps and bounds ahead of my other students. They could write better, they could speak better because we got into stories much faster. And what was even funnier was in my fourth period, I had this guy who was going out with someone in my sixth period. And so we kind of made the stories about them, but my sixth period got the stories like 3 or 4 weeks later because we were still doing the traditional 100 words of TPR. So I said, fourth period, you can't spill the beans on these stories to sixth period because she's got to be a little surprised in how these stories came out. And so it was a really fun win. And I realized how important it is to get into the actual language. It's not about vocabulary in an isolated list, and it's not about grammar rules in an isolated list. It's about the integration of both. Because in real life, we never, ever, ever encounter vocabulary without context. Never. Even if it's a one word like sign that says alto and it's a stop sign, you've got the context that it's a stop sign shape and you know what it means. You get context everywhere you go. We never ever encounter vocabulary out of context. And when have you ever, with an everyday person, ever had a conversation about a grammar rule? Not ever. And most people who speak their language fluently have no clue what the grammar rules are, because grammar rules are a way to explain something that really isn't explainable. They came after the language was developed, trying to explain it. But that's why there's so many loopholes in it, because it's not something that can be easily explained with one sentence. So that was my really big win there with that class, because they were just leaps and bounds better, because we started in those stories by week 2 and got in there, and I've applied a lot of those lessons from that second year into what I do now, that we get into the language as much as possible, as frequently as possible, and then I just write words they don't know up on the board, and that works really, really well for them.
Yeah. And Scott, you ask about face palms, and probably this was I wouldn't say a complete failure, because I did learn from this experience a valuable lesson on flexibility and being in the moment. But I do remember now I was teaching a fifth grade class in a Waldorf school, which is very artistic, and I was very proud to bring a story. But I prepared this story, and I was gonna story ask it with some details, but the story was kind of already made, and I was very proud that I thought of all the possible questions. I scripted some's like I got this, and all these extension activities. But when I was doing the story, it was very clear the kids were not into it, and it's like, all my extension activities and my script are based on this story of a story asking, and I have to switch on the spot, and that's when I started doing more, in a way, unscripted, or going away from what I had prepared and tried to be in the moment. And I do have a little bit of a background of improvising, so I kind of brought those skills with me, and it went fine, but it was a fail in the sense that I spent all this time preparing the story, and then it didn't land. So I had to read the room and rearrange my ideas and strategies. But still, I was strong in the skills to make it comprehensible, to connect, to do comprehension checks, that in the end it was successful. It was a good class, if I could say so myself. I mean, in the sense that students participated, they were engaged, and I didn't let it be completely disconnect. And that kind of what taught me, you could learn these recipes and bring it to the class, but if you don't have the backbone skills to change it in the moment if you need to, that's when you can fail, because not all recipes work in all different contexts. Teachers are different, students are different, schools are different. So I think that was my lesson there. Like, I need to go back to the basic, to my skills, and then just be more in the moment. So I know sometimes we talk to future teachers or teachers who say, how can I change and how can I start doing CI? It's like, yes, work on those basic skills. But I usually have an extra out of the norm, out of the ordinary suggestion, which is take an improv class, a community place somewhere in your city, at least once to get the experience of thinking fast on your feet, being in the moment, and if anything fails that you plan, be able to switch it up and maintain your cool. Not your I'm a cool teacher, but being calm and present, because students will know and will see if you are, the scatter or whatever it is. So take an improv class, and so that's number one. Um, and take at least one or two lessons of a language that you don't know at all, that is not even close to a language that you speak or learn. So if you are Spanish speaker or learn Spanish, do not take French or Italian. Take Chinese, Mandarin, Arabic, something completely different that you don't have exposure, so that you in your brain can have that experience of being this novice student, and then you'll start to internalize those key concepts of how slow you have to go, how many ways you have to present or give the input to make it comprehensible, and how to bring vocabulary in a context, and what does it take. So take those language, and if you can take it with a teacher who is experienced with teaching with CI, the best, because that's what you want to see. You want to see those skilled in action. So those are my two extracurricular suggestions. Take an improv class, and take a language you never taught.
Yeah, those are great suggestions. Absolutely. Jody, did you have a failure in class at all?
Um, well, yeah, of course. But I just want to comment on what Paulino just said. Um, where I believe we met, Scott, was at the NTPRS conference in Danvers. It might have been 2017 or 18, I think 18. And I went to Linda Lee's Mandarin session, and she's just such an amazing teacher. And she went, like you said, so slowly and always pointing to her charts and using TPRS, and it was just magical. And more recently, when I realize that I'm going too fast and need to just slow down and take a breath, I'll watch one of Alice Ayel's French story videos. And she's amazing as well. I've never met her, but I love her videos. Um, but yeah, failures. Boy, I wrote some stuff down. Um, uh, yeah, I, well, it's sort of a failure in the sense of the department, that because I'm using CI methods, um, I get accused of not being rigorous enough, which I think equates to not using enough grammar. And because the teacher who had the lower levels before me is much more grammar and sort of EMSCO workbook focused, um, sometimes the students will just raise their hands and say, "Can we have some verb conjugating today?" And it makes my heart sink, because they don't really understand that that's not how most people will acquire a language. It's only really those of us that are language nerds
Yeah.
that crave that sort of thing. And so, take the rest of the class and give it to them, but always with reluctance. And then I always feel like a failure when I have to resort to that. But then I think, well, maybe that's just what those kids who verbalize their need, it's that's what they require. So, so for this coming year, I'm doing 3 sections of Spanish 2 and then Heritage Spanish. And so I'm going to be using Somos, but I'm also going to have to bring in copies from the Comprehensible Classroom Grammar Workbook. And I'm sad about it, but I think that perhaps if we do plenty with Somos, that then I won't really need to be bringing as much in. But for me, the biggest thing has always been finding the adequate grading method. And at my current school, it's 40% participation, which I find truly ridiculous, because that pretty much ensures that most kids are going to get an A like your students got without even trying that hard,
Mm-hmm.
and certainly without acquiring much of the foreign language. Um, so that's always been an issue. And I also felt this year, every first class of the week, we would discuss with a placemat up on the board, uh, about weekend activities. And then their last class of the week, we always discuss what their plans are for the weekend. So they're using past or future or immediate future. And I was really disillusioned towards the end of the year, I stopped putting the placemat up. And most of the kids, even though they've done it all year, were unable to produce that uh, information about their simple activities that don't really change all that much during the course of the year. So I'm working on how I'm going to adjust that whole thing. And if I'm going to spend as much time on that or more time on stories. And I think that stories are going to be more effective than um, trudging through the placemat and the weather and so on, and make it more about school activities and more stories.
Well, I can't think of a real. I have them. I just can't think of any really big bombs that came to mind, and so I wanted to move on to the next topic because this one is kind of a key thing for me, as a you know extreme introvert. That is me. Um, when I'm out of school, I don't want to see another human being. I am locked in my room with my dogs, and I want to stay there, and I don't want to be with anybody else. And so being in the classroom is really can be stressful for me because you've got to be an extrovert. And so one of my survival techniques and what I recommend a lot of people, because a lot of people say, well, I can't be Blaine and I can't be Susie, their personalities. Well, my first tip for survival is because it feels awkward, especially for introverts. And I can't tell you how many teachers I have met that are really introverts, which we're in the wrong career to be introverts, really, to be, because that's what we're in front of people all the time. But I always say the first thing I do when I walk on campus is leave my dignity at the door. Um, that's just what I do. I have a taco costume that when we came back from COVID in class in November of that year, we only did what do you call it? Online teaching for the first trimester. So August, September, October, and then November we came in. I welcomed all my kids wearing this taco costume. I wear it on Taco Tuesdays to welcome into class. I've left my dignity. I have a different persona that I have in my classroom. And you may have to do that because I would never do something like that in real life. I would never. I got into the spirit days and I really went into all the spirit days because the kids, it it reduced the wall between me and my students so we can get to know each other on a different level. And sometimes that causes problems, but most of the time it allows them to be more open to learn because their effective filter is down. If I can be goofy and I can look like an idiot in front of class, they can look like an idiot in front of class too. And it's not that big of a deal. So that's when I started diving more into that because, unlike Paulino, I do not have a theater background. I am not an actor. I am not a comedian. I am not. I have the worst dad jokes possible. But leaning into my badness in all of those things has been a successful survival trick that's kept me going all of these years. And I was a little bit less to do that when my first 11 years teaching high school, and I learned that in my next 11 years teaching in middle schools, where I kind of let loose along that way. And now that I'm back in high school, I'm bringing that back in, and it allows my normally very stiff high schoolers who are too cool for school to actually have some fun in class. And we have a lot of fun, and we make that survival work because I've just come to the fact that I'm going to be an idiot in class, and I just lean right into that, and it works because, as I said, it is not my personality to do that afterwards, and I am completely drained of all energy at the end of the day. But I know I get to leave when the bell rings because I don't have any paperwork to actually have to grade. So what are any of your survival tricks that you had that have kept you going all these years in CI?
I'll start with this one.
Okay.
Um, First, a technique that I learned from Anne-Marie Chase and then really made it my own, and those are magic cards. I use color-coded large index cards for each section. And on those, I put the student's name and who their advisor is, their grade, that sort of thing. And then I put their personal information that as they provide it. I have their cards in my hands for every class pretty much. And so, what team are they on in the fall? And down to what are their siblings' names, and what kinds of pets do they have in their names, and if their parents are divorced or if they've lost a parent, that sort of thing, which helps me during parent-teacher conferences a lot. And then when we're in class, on the back side, I label it listening, speaking, etc., and I'll just be putting little ticks in different colors depending on the marking period. And so that helps me stay pretty organized with the students, and it's easy to just grab the correct bunch of cards and have it right there during class. And another tip is to not try to constantly be reinventing the wheel. We have so many colleagues who have done tremendous work over the years creating lesson plans for us. One that comes to mind that was wildly successful this year was during Woolly Week with the lesson plans for Encerrada en la Escuela. And everything is there. The slides have all of the TPRS motion gestures, and I just followed the plan. I was feeling pretty overwhelmed with current events and that sort of thing, and not feeling my normally more creative self. And man, the day that we got to the plate game was one of the happiest classes I think that I've ever had. The kids were hooting and hollering. I would call out a gesture, and then in pairs facing each other, the students had to see who could do it first, and then they would win a point. They had to keep track of their own points, make it easy on yourself. And then every once in a while, I would just shout out, "Róbalo," steal it. And with their feet, they had to try to grab the plate. And it was so much fun that we ended up doing something similar in all of the classes because everybody was just having so much fun. And another game that they love is the first really beautiful day in the spring, which comes quite late in New Hampshire. I put text from a story we were doing on cards all over my car in the parking lot with magnets, and we did running dictations. And that is physical. They can't say that I never took them outside.
Yeah.
And because they want to go outside to go down the hill, to go to the deli and buy food. And there will be no language with that, even though they promise there won't be. But with a running dictation, at least someone is reading and memorizing and coming back and speaking to their partner, who's then writing it down. And then they're switching roles, so everybody's doing a bit of everything. And and you get good points for taking them outside, I think, with the kids. So yeah, so the big thing is don't reinvent the wheel. Just use what we have, and then on your best days, be your super creative self.
Yeah. What about you, Paulino?
Uh, After 20 years of teaching this way, obviously I have gathered and learned a lot of strategies and activities and materials and developed my skills, developed the way that I do it in the classroom. And, I have a strong toolbox to get ideas and strategies from. But you were talking about the affected filter, and in a way also to build community, bringing humor in the classroom, which is super important, and in education in general, but also in the world language classroom, that community of learners who are encouraged to take risks, to respect one another, and when you have your group of friends, you feel more comfortable communicating. And so um, I kind of have this kind of like centering idea of thinking what it feels when I'm in a circle of, and you could be friends or families that you feel comfortable and communicating. How does it feel like? The ideas go back and forth. You ask some questions. You laugh together. So I carry this sense with me, and whenever feel like things are not going the way they're supposed to be, I breathe in and I breathe out. Sometimes very visually that my students see it, and then I bring that sense to me, and I try to regain that sense of this is our community. We are communicating, and sometimes I continue with what I was doing, but a little more centered, or I switch gears and always try to go back to that feeling as a goal. We know that we have our days, our students have their days, and it's not always happening, but to to be able to have an emotional feeling, that because language is emotion too, so that yourself can be centered and try to regain that sense of we are in a community of learners communicating in humor and feeling comfortable with one another, and to have the humanness part of it, right? Not just thinking we need to learn these 20 words and vocabulary, but that connection. Because when those connections are strong, we kind of forget that we were learning Spanish, French, German. We just think of the moment, what the experience we have together, and that's very powerful.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Okay, we're going a little over, but I want to finish up here. So, what would do you wish someone had told you to worry less about or do more of? And I'll let either one of you decide who wants to go first.
I'll go first with that one.
Okay.
I wish that I hadn't ever focused so much on grammar as I did in the 80s and 90s, and that I had focused more deliberately on class culture and community. Um, I started doing this after a workshop where I met a teacher from the Pacific Northwest called Colin, who talked about beginning each of his classes with a poem called In la Quecha Lakin, a Mayan poem that basically translates to "You are my other me. If I harm you, I harm myself. If I love and respect you, I love and respect myself." And then everyone in the class thanks everyone else for being there. and it's deeply powerful. Um, and we as soon as they come in, we form the circle with clapping, where we get a rhythm, and then recite the poem and then thank each other, and then everybody heads to their seats. And it's strong, and after a few classes we discuss what the poem means to each of the students, and so they really own their own interpretations of it. And I'm going to keep doing that every year.
Awesome, awesome. What about you, Paulino?
You know, I think personally, I've always been pretty a person who like to reflect on my practice and go back and tweak. So I have, in a way that naturally a little bit comes with the critic part, right? I would criticize myself, like, why do you do that? No, but that's okay. You're learning. No, no, you should. A little bit that those two voices in my head, but. Um, I wish that I wish that my reflected practice from earlier, especially if you like reading and going more, was to think more critically of what why I do what I do, and go way back to the principles that guide with the practice and the materials you use, and those skills, like I was talking before, that backbone. Because uh, if you have seen other teachers and you like what they do and you try to copy but without that background knowledge, it's not you. You're just copying someone else. And in some cases, it might work just to get you started. But then I think it's very important you find your true self, because the genuine self will be the best communicator in the classroom. So I would have liked some more mentoring, which I do have now, and I have that mind into going deeper into, like, why is it that I do what I do, and going a little deeper, because you know not because just I'm a nerd, but also because the deeper I get into that knowledge, the stronger I feel into not only into what I do, but also when I communicate with stakeholders, the parents, the administration. And that to me is important, especially now, not just because of the culture of the classroom, but because of, without getting to political things, of the bigger climate, right? Defending the language and culture and communication in the classroom, and defending my program and what I do in the classroom. I have those background information to support it. And that, that not also keeps what you're doing in the class principled, based on theory and research, but also keeps a strong program for the people from the outside. That when this is like, oh, why this is happening, you can support it with some ideas. So sometimes we have to be advocates, and I think that's important as well.
Awesome, awesome. Yes. And for me, I'll say two things. One is let go of the structure, meaning we used to script everything out and have everything written. And the best classes I've had is when I threw away the script, or we went off script and we just talked and communicated and developed a story off the cuff. And now my only script is, now there is a character. I use my little framework where character, problem, failure, success. So establish a character, give them a problem, they try to solve it and fail, and then they try to solve it and succeed. That's my only thing I go into every class, and it's become so successful that way, much more so than if I could have scripted it out, because if it's scripted, it's more my story and not our story. And then the second thing that I would highly recommend is really spend the time to get to know your students as human beings before behavior, before their grades, before their proficiency. Get to know them. I spend 4 to 6 weeks getting to know my students through the language. Obviously I'm doing it through the language, but we have the most fun that way. I learn them, and we find each other as human beings first, and so a lot of those other conflicts that might have arisen don't arise because we understand each other as people and not necessarily as a grade or a student number or a behavior child or any of those types of things. We understand them as people. We get to know what are their likes, what are their dislikes, who are their friends, who are they dating right now. I don't go too deep into that, but just on the surface of that, because kids like to talk about that. It's gossip and it's fun gossip, but we're doing it in the target language. And so those are my two things. Let go and let the process work itself out. It will. Because think about it, parents do not come to the script with their 1 year old and say, we're going to talk about this today. And no, that's off script. We're not going to go there. We don't do that. We just communicate. And if you let go, your stress level is going to go down. Their stress level is going to go down. You're going to get higher engagement. And then you're going to get to know your students on a much more personal level. And that just brings more success for everybody along the way. So that's my big recommendation.
Just like
So
comprehend this podcast. We
yeah,
have some ideas, but we don't have a script.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So before we go, I got a quick little ad that we need to do, and then we'll be right back. So just give us one moment here. Is it already August again? And you're supposed to have a fresh, engaging, life-changing plan for the first week? Cute. Here's the deal. Back to School Boot Camp is your secret weapon. 10 short, pre recorded lessons you can watch in pajamas while hiding from your admin or during that mysterious planning period we keep hearing about. You walk away with strategies, plans, and actual confidence, not just a Pinterest board full of guilt. Access it all for a full year. Go to mm.us/bootcamp and get yourself together before the kids show up. Okay, so I want to thank both of our guests today, and I meant to hit the wrong button. There it is. That's the button I wanted to hit. For joining us on our premiere episode. So thank you so much for tuning in. For those who are joining us live, you could have been doing anything else, been at the pool, but you chose us instead. A big shout out to our guests, Jodi and Paulino, for sharing their glorious CI wins and spectacular flops, as so we all feel a little bit less alone. If you got a laugh, a new idea, or just feel better about your own chaos, make sure to hit that subscribe button, drop us a review, and share this episode with another teacher who needs it. Remember, you can watch us live on YouTube or catch the replay anytime on your favorite podcast app. Okay, teachers, ditch the drills, trust the process, and I'll see you next time on Comprehend This.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.